Welcome to the last video for the presentation of the teams competing in this year's, or I should say in this editions of Legal Challenge. And we transition to the live feed. Yes, here is the team called One Stone coming from the UK. So we have the Polish team, the Serbian team, the British team, and then the international team that we couldn't come up with any other definition for. So now you're in front of the British team. We're going to talk today about who they are and what do they think are their strong points, and maybe they will reveal the weak points. I don't know. Maybe you will spot the weak points, and we're going to have a secret guest joining us in, well, not so secret because you'll see it listed in the description of the YouTube video, but we have a guest coming in a few minutes to join us. So let's start with Alma. Would you, do you really think this team can win after seeing the three stellar strong teams that you've seen before?
Yes, sure.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so James, Gabriella, it's very nice to see you here today. Thank you for your time. And I wish you all the best on your semifinal. I think it's scheduled for April 21st. So good luck. And I hope that I have a chance to see you here in Vilnius.
You will. The UK is totally kicking ass in terms of vaccination. So one thing I'm sure is that all the Americans and all the British people will come over, as well as all the Russians, because of, Sputnik and AstraZeneca. And then Germans will trail in the back, and then we'll have some people from Poland who have immunity because they were sick twice or thrice, and the same for all the Belarusians and probably some Lithuanians and so on. So yeah. It's a total disaster. It's some countries are ahead, some are behind, and it's totally unpredictable. So it's a game of guesses if you look at the summit list and take a guess who gets vaccinated when. But really hoping that everyone gets vaccinated by the end of the summer. And everyone is welcome to come in September. And if we cannot run it in September, we're gonna shift it to whenever we can run it. Because the main point is to get you guys to meet all the other people working in the games industry and, get them to sit down with you in the lobby and say, so, what do you really think about China? And then, they'll see how that goes. Could you introduce yourselves and say where you graduated from and what are you currently doing?
Gabby, after you.
Yeah, so we're both based in London. Hi everyone, it's really nice to be here as well. So I am currently a newly qualified associate at IP boutique firm called Powell Gilbert in London. I previously trained at the same firm that James is currently at, and that's Simmons & Simmons as well. I actually didn't study law, so I originally studied history and did a law conversion course, which is pretty normal in the UK. And that's probably where I first sort of developed an interest in intellectual property. But it was only really until during my training contract where we were kind of looking at different areas of law and obviously gaming and the games industry and esports is a really exciting area to be in. So this competition looked like a great way in, really.
And for me, as Gabby said, I am currently a trainee at Simmons & Simmons. That's how we both met. I initially studied law, unlike Gabby, at Kingston University, which is based just outside London. I took a bit of a gap and did the bar course. I tried to become a barrister first. And then as I'm a glutton for punishment, I went and did a Masters of Law at King's College London. And that was when I managed to get my training contract at Simmons. And as Gabby has said, we were quite interested in the conference and the competition that came with it. And here we are today.
I think it's time to bring our guest in the studio. So, Visagaro, Alma, and Minugay, please
Just guys.
Get our friend in here. We're gonna have some. Hello, sir. I think we are still having you connecting to audio.
Hello.
Hello. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Okay, let me switch myself to gallery view. Hello, my name is Jas Purewal, and I help people to make video games. It's very nice to meet you.
Are you a lawyer?
I am a lawyer. I help people with both legal and the business side of working in the games industry, and I've done so for about 12 years now, I think, something like that.
Okay, so we have you here so that you can help us expose the the core truth about this team and understand them. Because I was today meeting a French person who said, "Oh, I was in Australia when my kid was little, and the kid learned Australian from the television." I'm like, Australian is not a language, and he said, "No, it is. I mean, he had problems speaking American when he moved to America." I was like, "Well, okay, yeah, sure." So for the as a British person to a British person, what is this like? What is the most important thing for you when you talk about the people who are joining the games industry or interested in the games industry? Should they be barristers, solicitors? Even like the whole concept is, blows my mind. So just lawyers, like normal lawyers, like what is the typical path of an in-house counsel in the games industry in the UK?
Got it. So I'm going to answer that in two different ways. One, the career path, and then the other is like the meta skills more generally. I should say, by way of background, for me, for example, so I'm a partner at Wiggin, but before that, I've been at a few different firms. I trained as a solicitor at CMS Cameron McKenna. I moved to Oldswang and I was a litigator when I started out. I was doing court disputes. I moved to a firm called Osborne Clarke and worked with a guy called Paul Gardner, who's also a friend of the Summit. And that's where I moved from being a litigator to doing transactional and general commercial work. Moved to Silicon Valley. And then when I came back from Silicon Valley, I set up my own firm, which I ran for 7 years. Before that was then merged with Wiggin. So I've always been a solicitor. And when I started out, I really had no idea that I was going to work in the games industry. I'd been a gamer and a technophile since I was 8, but I had no idea that I was going to connect that with the games industry. So the time when I decided that I wanted to work in the games industry, I was already a solicitor for a few years. But you don't have to do that. The games industry has grown so fast and it has such wide range of needs that really any of the forms of legal practice in the UK can be helpful to the games industry, whether you are a barrister, whether you are a solicitor, legal exec, paralegal, or whether you are, for example, a patent or a trademark attorney. And at Wiggin, for example, all of those different folks help out in relation to the games industry. But most people who work in the games industry who are lawyers in the UK are solicitors. The reason being, of course, that solicitors are the general practitioners. They are the ones who have the widest range of contact with clients across the widest range of areas. But like I said, the more specialist types of legal practitioner still have a lot to offer. And so I would, during the course of the year, expect to work with certainly trademark attorneys, to maybe a bit of a lesser extent patent practitioners, and from time to time barristers as well, if a video games business was to get into contentious matters and needed to seek a litigation specialist.
Which means like the interesting stuff happens finally. Okay, sure. So Gabriella and James, could you name the single most impactful thing that made you interested in the video games industry? Like why not music? Why not film? You get very like cult comic books. Maybe you want to work with the author of Saga or help Meta Barons to transition to film or something. Work with Netflix or why video games?
I mean, I think for me, the thing that really drew me towards video games is sort of the variety that's available to lots of different people. I think it's the one kind of area from a very social perspective. And I think actually the lockdown has really sort of brought that into perspective is where you can actually play with lots of different people. Everyone to some extent has an interest. Even my flatmates who do not play video games still have played Dance Mat, for example, during lockdown. And I know that other people have been playing lots of different games, but I think from a social perspective, it's always been quite interesting. And I think it kind of, the interaction between technology and creativity in this industry is particularly interesting as well. So yeah, there's lots of different reasons, but that's probably from a personal perspective where I first was sort of interested in this more so.
Sounds good. What about James?
For me, the big driver that got me sort of into the games industry, other than sort of playing games myself like Mario Kart, and I'm a massive Nintendo fan, but I won't go into that now. But for me, it's the growth of esports that's been a huge driver to my interest in the area, and I think it's that growth within the industry at such an sort of exponential rate in comparison to, say, more traditional sports, which has grown over decades, and in some cases with football and rugby, this over the course of 100 years. With esports, it's almost been like sort of a steroidal growth in the past decade. It had its sort of it had its moment in the early noughties, but it was a bit sort of a weed and sort of grew and then collapsed. But in the past 5 years, it's had a renaissance, and with the development of technology, you've got all of these issues now coming out with esports. And for me, a big interest is sort of integrity and sort of protection within the industry and the regulation that should be starting to wrap around these areas. And you've got gambling issues, you've got kids as young as 13 now making millions of dollars, and how do you protect them? And you've got obviously huge investment in esports teams. We had Fnatic recently do a crowdfunding, which just sort of shows the growth and how much interest there's been. And obviously COVID has made that even more exponential in the past year, seeing as traditional sports took a bit of a nap.
And even from the traditional, from the, the not so nice perspective recently, I think friend of Jas recently went through the situation where the data center burned down and some virtual items got lost in the process. So that's a whole new issue. Like, how do you classify this legally? What exactly has happened? And is there a way to, the whole thing, like walking it back and doing it? We applied it to ourselves and we thought, oh, Jesus. I mean, we don't even know where to begin. I don't think there's studios that are, that have a contingency plan for something like that happening, because that event doesn't really have an analogy in the real life. If you own a warehouse and there's stuff, it's not just gonna explode and go up in flames, or you have insurance, but can you insure virtual items? Can you insure digital items? So I have a question for Jas. How normal would this be for the UK industry to hire a non-UK lawyer? If you look at the, let's say, some of the global games companies, if you look at in-house consoles, it's quite common to have people coming from different countries. And the thinking is that, okay, I'm going to grab this guy from France, so if we have something in France, he's the go-to person. And a Korean lawyer, because if we have something in Korea and it's complicated, we get that covered. There's a German lawyer, so if there's the new legislation, he's going to help us with that. And of course, everyone wants to have a Chinese or Chinese-speaking lawyer, but that's not very often the case. But at least people talk about this, like, oh, if someone would come to me and say, I'm fluent in Mandarin, and hired right here on the spot. So what is your take on this? Is UK more of a national approach, that you have to be British to be working in the British companies and the House Council, or not really? It's changing?
Probably if I was to take a quick check of most of the UK in-house council, you would probably find that a majority of them are British nationals, but not universal at all. For all the reasons that Sergei was talking about, that ultimately you need to have an international offering. You can't just be super jurisdictional specific. And particularly for the UK, although it is one of the very large worldwide markets with a large domestic market, at the same time, the UK is often provides a European base or an international base for especially some of the larger games companies. And so quite often a lot of international work is being coordinated through the UK. Or even if it's not, even if the regional office is in Germany or Holland, for example, then still the UK often plays quite a large international role It's just that the nature of the UK is a very international facing company. So it's quite common, therefore, to have non-UK nationals practicing in the UK. But really, I think whether you're a UK national or not, you need to be able to think international. Yeah, you can't just think domestic in relation to the games industry for a whole bunch of different reasons.
And we had those discussions going through all the team presentations. In your opinion, what's the biggest difference between working in-house and law firm? So why would someone choose a career and say, I'm going to spend 7 years running my law firm and not join a well-established global company as an in-house counsel?
It's a choice between, this is a generalization, right? But as a rough generalization, I've always thought of it about whether you want to go wide or whether you want to go deep. Do you want to go wide and shallow, or do you want to go narrow and deep? That is a generalization. But generally speaking, outside counsel will have a number of different valued relationships with games companies. They often help them on a wide variety of matters, but at the end of the day, fundamentally, we are a hired gun helping in certain aspects of a particular project. Sometimes you get to see it all the way through to an end, but oftentimes that isn't really your expectation. Whereas if you're on the inside, if you're on the in-house part of that project, you are helping with the team all the way through to the finish. And like I said, it's a generalization. In practice, in-house counsel will get to see a whole variety of different areas as well. But there is just that sense that they are more likely to be going through it all the way from start to finish. Whereas there isn't as much of an expectation from outside counsel. You'd see something from the beginning to the end, but you would see quite a lot of different things. I do still enjoy being able to work with 10, 20 different companies, get different perspectives, understand where they are, get market intelligence about, okay, so you're doing this and you're doing this. And over time, that becomes a big part of your appeal. Your clients are coming to you because you see it from so many different angles, and you become a clearinghouse and a source of expertise about what's the best way to do it. I mean, oftentimes now people are coming to me and they're saying, okay, so you know this. So you probably know we're trying to do it in that particular way. What's your applicable experience that you can help with?
So it's the difference of someone cooking fish at home today and someone cooking fish every day for the whole month. And then if I'm cooking fish, I'm going to call my friend at the restaurant and say, so what do you do exactly with these things? And maybe he's bored out of his mind cooking fish. But for me, it's a great help.
Right. I mean, so for example, by now I've seen, for example, development and publishing agreements, left, right, center, up, down, backwards, forwards, the ones that you think are crazy and insane, and the ones that you go, oh yeah, actually that really makes sense, right? You see a whole different versions of them because they come by your desk. So it makes sense when someone calls you up and says, do you know publishing agreements? And you can say, yeah, I know publishing agreements.
And your opinion at a law firm is more or less, this is what the industry does versus one company that has, one agreement every 2 or 3 years.
And then the fun thing in the games industry is that you get to make that market practice as well. Make is too strong a word, but you get to influence it over time and hopefully influence it for the better. Like we've seen many, many good and many bad, again, just to pick this example, bad publishing agreements. And over time, you try to do good and you try to nudge it in the right direction. That's fun. That's a fun part of the job as well.
What would be your question? Like, if you could ask one question to Gabriella and James, as you would try to understand whether or not they're a good fit for the games industry, what would be that central question? And I really want you to ask that question and then the guys to answer it. Let's say you're in this interview, okay, you graduated from here, you've done this, you've done that. Sure, you play video games. Yeah, unless you're interviewing for Riot Games, you don't really want to know their account name or how many hours they've put into League of Legends. So outside of that, like, how do you try to understand if they're a good fit for the industry?
Am I allowed one question or multiple questions?
I mean, 1, 2, but not like a whole thing. Just,
Sure. I would normally ask 2 questions, different kinds of questions. One of them is talk me through an industry topic recently that you found really interesting and tell me why you think it's interesting. And then the second is a wider question. What are you passionate about in your life? So, Gabriella, what are you passionate about in your life?
I think lockdown has really sort of changed a focus on what sort of I'm passionate about. I think currently, outside of work, it's I play a lot of hockey, and it's about competitive sports, but it's also about teamwork. So that's something that's been outside of the games industry, outside of law, something that's been really important to me and my mental well-being over the past year. I've joined a slightly competitive team, which has also meant that I've had to pull up my game a bit and improve skills. And it just means that you have to really set time aside for something else outside of work. So I think probably that's been one thing during lockdown that's sort of really focused my interest and my time outside of work, if that makes sense.
And just to continue, and then I'll come back to you, if that's okay. So the other question is, tell me about something that's interested you in the games industry recently, and why was it interesting?
I think one of the areas of interest, and I don't think it's like a particular event that's happened, but it's the use of AR, augmented reality and virtual reality technology in games, and how that can really, I feel like at the moment it's a really exciting area, and it's actually something I've been working on or been thinking about in general, and its application to lots of different areas. And I think the potential for that to really engage in wider audiences has been really interesting. I think it's quite a crowded space. I think there's lots of startups and companies in this area with lots of ideas using similar technology, and I think that's going to sort of be a kind of interesting point from a dispute perspective over intellectual property rights and who owns what technology and for example. And I also think there's a lot of interest in probably how these companies can collaborate with developers outside the games industry. You can look at things like museums, concerts that are using this kind of technology to engage with audiences. And I think all these sort of ideas and has really been something that's been quite an interesting area to think about.
I was going to ask you if you're able to give me an example of AR and VR use inside or outside of games that particularly interested you, or that you've been able to try.
I think so. I think going back to what was sort of interesting about the games industry, and it kind of interlapsed, and I can't remember exactly what live event it was, but it was a live event which was the launch of a game, and maybe this is for my poor memory, but it was the use of, I think, AR, which brought a live dragon into the arena. And it was just that it just captured the imagination. I think it's always interested people, and I pointed it out, even if you're not interested in it. And I think it's just, I mean, it's a great way of generating interest and revenue, and in something that is to lots of different audiences. It captures, that was really interesting, I think.
Great, thank you. James, what are you passionate about in your life?
I had to follow Gabby on that. And there's a few things I'm passionate about.
You're only allowed to mention one.
Oh, only one passion.
A hard question, I know.
A hard question. I think sport has always been probably my biggest passion. I'm getting a bit old now, but I played American football for a number of years. I got the opportunity to play for the national team as well, which was quite an honour, and got to play in Finland against some absolutely phenomenal players who kicked the living hell out of us. And then sort of I've transitioned across to coaching. So I coach younger kids in the sport. I've coached women into the sport and helped grow the game in that way, and been quite successful at that. So I would say sort of American football and coaching has been my biggest passion over the past few years.
Mindaugas, are you sure this is not the Canadian team? It sounds very much like it's either the Canadians or the Czech Republic. I'm not sure about the UK. Like, my stereotypes is broken down to pieces.
Tea is my passion, Sergey.
I was thinking like more
tea. Wow, we can talk about tea all day long on this particular group.
Give me a good cup of that, and we'll be.
Yeah.
So what about the industry matter?
Yeah.
Sorry, say that again. Skip there.
What about the industry matter that just recently got your attention? Is there anything specific that got
specific about the industry? As Gabby was talking there, one thing that has caught me has been that conflation between video games and sort of more traditional media. So I think one of the questions you asked, Gabby, was about sort of AI and how that's developed. And one thing that's been quite amazing has been the concerts that have been put through video games, and how much the video games industry is sort of getting into bed with those industries. I think there's been concerts with Post Malone and Travis Scott, and those have been sort of a virtual reality type concert, and that'll be interesting to see how that develops over the next few years. But as I said at the beginning of the call, one thing that I've been very interested in has been the regulation around esports, the growth of integrity, and you've got the Esports Integrity Commission, who are doing a lot of good work in how they're looking to regulate the industry. We've had judgments come out about Counter-Strike and the cheating involved in that. That was a very interesting area. And also sort of protection of young people in the esports industry. And because of the growth of it being so quick, I think there's probably a lot of catch up that regulation has to do to make sure that all parties are sort of protected, and making sure that kids who are 13 and 14 are not being exploited by the industry.
So just as a side note to Jas, he knows a person who went from the professional sports into the video games industry. And that person has left the video games industry to go back into professional sports, I think a couple of years ago. But there's also someone that we both have met at the summit who is now a part of FIFA, and who made the transition from the video games industry to being a console at FIFA. So there is more of this sort of, sports and video games or esports, call it whatever you like, cross-pollination, and that's going to result in a few years in people in the sports industry being more knowledgeable about the video games, and people in the video games understanding better how do you do deals with the sports organizations, how that works, how can you bring some of that experience into the video games industry, and so on. Just that still, it's a pretty slow process, I think. Not really reflecting the growth of the revenues. But, all right, good. So we've gone through this and we've gone through that. I think my last question for today is the big open question is, dear British team, if you win, could you, each of you name the reason why you think you won? Because this video will be online for a while. So in less than a month, you've got the semifinals and the finals. Assuming that you win, you're going to go back and say, well, you see, I told you. And then if you lose, why do you think did that happen? Just look a little bit into the future and see, and then, we'll rewind in a couple of months and say, oh, wow.
Shall I go from the start, James? So I guess probably preparation is key. And I say that I think we've got a lot of preparation ahead of us. I think actually doing this over Zoom is going to be very different to doing it in person. I personally find that maybe it's a little less nerve-wracking, so hopefully that will weigh in our favour. I do think that when we first looked at this, I remember we really went into the detail. We spent a lot of time on this and probably prioritised it over our real billable work as well when we were first working this. So I do think, going back to that point about sort of looking at it from a broad perspective, also going to the deep dive into the issues, we really did have a look at this. And I felt pretty confident a year ago that I knew this case inside out. So we'll see in a few weeks whether I can remember all of it. But I think spending a lot of time on it and also just slightly different format would probably work in my favour, I think.
And for losing the whole thing,
probably other people have done more preparation and probably for the same reasons, but just better. It's really hard to see, I think, on the day. I think also it depends on, without going too much into the detail of the case, but I think we definitely thought that one side was had slightly better arguments that we could put forward than the other side, and I won't say which way. I don't want to prejudice anything. So I think it's luck of the draw against who you're against, and also probably a little bit about which side we have to represent in the semi-finals.
Jas, any advice you would give based on your knowledge? Like, let's say these guys are looking not only at the hearings, but at doing this digitally. So that's a big new thing for everyone. So every judge presentation we do, we ask the judge if there's any specifics, and little things turn up. Like, people are used to standing up when they talk, and you cannot do it digitally. So maybe get a standing desk, and that will help some dress up nicely. So that's been consistent across every judge, because they're saying we're going to dress nicely, so why the competing teams shouldn't do the same? And some judges say, like, look, it's just a matter of time before we go back to the courtrooms. And that means that you have to be like in your courtroom, except you're on Zoom, but you shouldn't really, go back and wear a t-shirt or something. So yeah, little things, get your phone as far as possible. Make sure your dog is sitting next to you so you can pet the dog and the dog is not going to bark. What else? Don't make notes outside of the screen, so because no one really knows what you're doing there. So if you make note, then you show that you're I'm making notes, and so little things like this. So Jas, in your opinion, in terms of digital experience, some advice that you can think can help?
Sure. And just like Sergey said, it's always the little things, right? It's always the little things that can go wrong. Device has got to be charged up, and the lighting's got to be right, and practice it beforehand, right? So do a little thing. There we go. Practice to each other, and cut your mum or your dad or your cousin or your flatmate in so that they can see what it looks like, and then go around to where they are and say, right, how does it look? How does it actually fit? Does all of that work? Record yourself as well. Everybody hates listening to themselves. But it's so worth doing. It's so worth looking at your own little facial mannerisms, because, of course, Sergey knows I can be quite expressive with my hands and my body movement and moving around. And there's a reason why, from an advocacy perspective, but you don't have any of that ability. So your face is going to be particularly important. So making sure it's in what you want and it's expressing things in the way that you want it to, it's worth practicing some of this stuff and record it and play it back to yourself. That's another thing. And just like Sergey said as well, like one of the biggest challenges always is, what are you looking at? Because you can't simultaneously look at yourself and also be looking at the camera screen as well, which is why, again, you just can be so confident in what it is that you are in what you are presenting. So all the little things, like the little silly simple things, as well as you're giving advocacy into effectively not even a screen, but a tiny little camera. So you may as well get used to it and practice it and recognize that you're not just doing speaking, but you're being an advocate. So how do you get the advocacy part across? And practicing it to each other and recording yourself is probably the best way of doing it. And at the same time, I guess, is, of course, it's quite formal and all the rest of that, but you want to show your personality as well. And your attire and your composure and your behaviour towards the judges. It's really no different to if you were there in person. So yeah, all of that simple stuff too. Good clothes, posture, comfort, being relaxed. There we go. Sergey suddenly improved his posture by about 200% as have I.
I mean, a few judges mentioned this. They said that when you stand up, you have a different presentation of yourself. So they were asking people to think about them actually standing up so that they're
not
more
a bad idea. Yeah, it's not a bad idea at all. And all the all advocates everywhere else will present standing up. There's good reasons for it. So if your working environment allows that, then go for it.
And I think Brian this morning mentioned the fact that when he's in the Zoom hearings or conferences, he noticed that the whole attention goes just to one person. So normally in the courtroom, let's say there's two of you, there are some judges, there are some people sitting, the spectators. So your attention will drift. You'll look at the other judge, you'll look at this judge, you'll draw some things, you'll look at the spectators. Then they're like, oh yeah, sure, keep going. Yeah, you look at the other team. But in the Zoom hearing, you're talking, James, so we're all watching you very closely, 100%. Like, we're not watching anyone else, we're just watching you. So he was saying that it's very important like everything is more pronounced, more amplified. So the risk of, so you have to sort of have more control over what image you present to the other team.
That's right. Here's another one for you. Taking advantage of the UK being a major litigation centre, which is many of the hearings are available for you to join, right? So if you get the opportunity, go and listen to some live advocacy and just watch it. It doesn't really matter what it's about or whether you have any idea what they're talking about. Just go and watch it. And it's the same in the US, it's the same in Canada, it's the same, I suppose, in many countries. On YouTube, you can just go and watch a bunch of live advocacy. I have no idea if that's going to be useful or not, but my hunch is that it probably would be. I would do it if I was in your position.
That sounds like, very, very solid advice. I hope the other teams follow too. So just in a few days, everyone will be able to watch the presentations of the 4 teams. Each team had a special guest. So for Jas, that was Jan Peter, Tobias, and Rafal from CD Projekt. So totally different people, giving different perspectives on what it means to be an in-house versus law firm, and what it means to compete, and what does it take to be successful in the games industry, and so on. And then watch the other teams, get ready, watch the judges. So that when the hearing begins, you're not distracted by these things. You already know that, okay, this is Karen. And Karen was actually saying that she never asks questions. She's a very nice judge, and people should be very friendly with her. So we'll see how it goes. In every panel, we have an American judge and then different other countries. So there's not a single panel that is more American than the others. It's all mixed. It's 3 judges, and then 5 judges. So it's all, and everyone is, tons of experience in litigating cases in real life. So whoever is in the judge panel has seen it all before. So make your research, and and then we'll see you at the summit when you come, whatever. It doesn't matter which place you take, and then you'll meet guys like my friend here, and get the real picture and be able to sit down with a cup of tea and say, so now what do you really think about this? Come on. Be honest about that. Any last words from you, Jas? Patriotic.
More power. Sorry, go ahead.
Any patriotic wishes? Do you feel invested in the UK team? We never had a UK team win before. Oh, we did last year.
Yes, you have.
Yes, you did.
So do you feel there is a need to prove that you can do it as a country?
Such a loaded question.
We totally.
Especially in 2021. Oh, more power to you guys with everything else that you're doing and everything else that's going on in the world. More power to you for taking this on, and I'm sure it will be a great experience. It's already been a great experience, one way or the other, and one way or another, we'll all be watching and rooting for you folks, and hope it works out well, and you'll be able to meet the other contestants. And when the world turns again, we'll all meet up in person, and we will all be here to help you as much as we can. So yeah, do try to enjoy it as much as you can, get as much experience as you can out of it, and then in due course at the summit, please come and talk to as many of us as possible and ask all the questions that you want to ask, and we'll all try and help you as much as we can.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jas. And before I forget, so this is it for the presentation. I'm going to transition to this slide that I keep forgetting. Now you're seeing all the wonderful law firms and games companies that help us run the summit and the legal challenge. We're very thankful to every sponsor present in the summit. And we'll see you in less than a month when the hearings go live. That's the end of the recording.